"This truck ain't gonna start, no way in hell." The words echoed through the dusty parking lot of Miller's Garage in rural Texas, carried on the hot afternoon wind like a challenge nobody asked for. 3 men stood around a battered 1995 Ford F-250, rust eating through the bed panels, one headlight dangling like a broken tooth, the hood propped open to reveal an engine that looked more like a graveyard than machinery. They were laughing, not the polite kind of laughter that comes from genuine humor, but the cruel, dismissive kind that comes from men who think they know everything and enjoy proving others wrong. The tallest one, wearing a faded Dallas Cowboys cap and boots caked with dried mud, slapped the fender hard enough to send a shower of rust flakes to the ground. "I've been working on trucks my whole life," he announced to anyone within earshot, his voice thick with the confidence of someone who's never been questioned. "This thing's toast. Engines seized. Wiring shot. Transmissions probably welded itself shut. Whoever thinks they can fix this is either crazy or stupid." His buddies nodded in agreement, one of them pulling out his phone to film the moment, because of course in 2025, humiliation isn't real unless it's documented and shared. But they weren't talking to just anyone. They were talking about Sarah Collins, a 38-year-old mechanic who had spent the last 12 years building a reputation in a town that didn't think women belonged under hoods. Sarah stood off to the side, arms crossed, her coveralls stained with the kind of grease that tells stories of late nights, impossible fixes, engines brought back from the dead when everyone else had given up. Her face was calm, unreadable, the kind of calm that comes from hearing this exact speech 100 times before. She didn't interrupt, didn't defend herself, just waited, because Sarah had learned something her father taught her before he passed. Let your work speak louder than your words. Actions don't lie. The camera slowly pans across the scene, the garage behind her with its hand-painted sign reading Collins Automotive, where dead engines come to life, the American flag hanging from the awning, the rows of tools organized with surgical precision on the walls inside. This isn't some slick corporate shop with fancy lifts and computerized diagnostic machines. This is a place built by hand, sustained by grit, powered by the kind of stubborn refusal to quit that defines people who grew up with nothing and made something anyway. The men keep laughing, keep talking, completely unaware that in about 10 minutes, their confidence is going to cost them more than they bargained for. Before we understand what's about to happen, before we see Sarah prove every single one of them wrong, we need to go back. Not just days or weeks, but years. Because this isn't a story about a truck. It's a story about a woman who was told she couldn't, who was laughed at and dismissed and underestimated at every single turn, and who decided that the best response wasn't anger or bitterness, but excellence. Sarah Collins grew up in this town, the daughter of a mechanic who ran a small shop out of a converted barn on the family property. Her mother had left when Sarah was 5, packed a bag one night and never came back, leaving Sarah's father, James Collins, to raise her alone while trying to keep the business afloat. Money was always tight. Some months, they ate canned beans and white rice for dinner because that's what they could afford. But James never complained. He just worked harder, longer, accepting any job that came his way, no matter how difficult or underpaid. Sarah spent her childhood in that barn-turned garage, watching her father diagnose problems with nothing but his hands and his ears, rebuilding engines on a workbench lit by a single hanging bulb, welding patches onto exhaust systems that should have been replaced but the customer couldn't afford new. "Sarah," he'd say, his hands black with grease, his smile tired but genuine, "an engine's just like a person. It's got a heartbeat, it's got lungs, it's got a nervous system. You treat it with respect, you listen to what it's trying to tell you, and you can fix almost anything. People look at something broken and see garbage. We look at it and see possibility." Those words became Sarah's gospel. By the time she was 12, she could rebuild a carburetor. By 15, she could diagnose a failing transmission by the sound it made. By 18, she could take apart an engine and put it back together better than it started. But being good wasn't enough, because she was a woman in a field that didn't want her. After high school, she tried to get hired at the local dealership. The manager, a man with a gut that hung over his belt and a handshake like wet bread, looked at her application, looked at her, and laughed. "Honey, we don't hire girls for shop work. You could try the front desk if you want." She applied at 3 other garages. 2 didn't even call her back. The third told her she could sweep floors and change oil for minimum wage, but nothing else. No diagnostic work, no engine rebuilds, nothing that mattered. Sarah declined. If she was going to work, she was going to do it on her own terms. So she did what her father did. She opened her own shop. At 22 years old, with $5,000 saved from side jobs and a loan from a local credit union that nearly didn't approve her, Sarah bought a small metal building on the edge of town and hung a sign that said, Collins Automotive. The early years were brutal. Customers didn't trust her. Men would come in, see her, and ask if there was a man around who could actually look at their car. Some would leave when she said no. Others would stay, skeptical, watching her every move like they were waiting for her to prove their assumptions right. But Sarah didn't give them the satisfaction. She fixed their cars faster and cheaper than the dealership. She diagnosed problems others missed. She explained what was wrong in plain language without trying to upsell parts they didn't need. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, word spread. The woman mechanic who actually knew what she was doing. The one who didn't talk down to you, the one who could bring a dead engine back to life when everyone else said it was impossible. And that's exactly what brought her to this moment. 3 days ago, old Mr. Henderson, a farmer in his 70s who'd been a customer for years, called Sarah in a panic. His 1995 Ford F-250, the truck he'd driven for nearly 3 decades, the truck that had pulled every trailer, hauled every load, survived every Texas summer and ice storm, had finally given up. He'd taken it to the dealership. They told him the engine was seized, the wiring was fried, the transmission was shot, and it would cost more to fix than the truck was worth. They offered him $2,000, trade-in value toward a new truck he couldn't afford. Mr. Henderson, voice shaking on the phone, asked Sarah if there was anything she could do. I know it's a long shot, he'd said, but this truck's been with me since my wife was alive. I can't just let it go. Sarah told him to bring it in. When the truck arrived on a flatbed tow, because it wouldn't start, wouldn't even turn over, Sarah saw what the dealership saw, a vehicle that looked finished. Rust had claimed large sections of the body. The interior smelled like mildew and despair. When she tried the ignition, nothing. Not even a click, just silence. But Sarah didn't see garbage. She saw possibility. She told Mr. Henderson she'd take a look. No promises, no guarantees, but she'd try. He left the keys and a check for her diagnostic fee, his eyes wet with the kind of gratitude that comes from someone being treated with dignity when everyone else wrote them off. For 2 days, Sarah worked on that truck. Not for the money, the diagnostic fee barely covered her time, but because Mr. Henderson reminded her of her father. A man who loved something not because it was valuable, but because it meant something. She started with the basics. Battery dead. Terminals corroded beyond recognition. She replaced the battery. Still nothing. She pulled the starter motor. Rusted solid. Internal gears frozen. She disassembled it. Cleaned every part. Replaced the brushes. Reassembled it. Installed it back. Turned the key. The engine. Cranked, but didn't fire. Progress, but not victory. She checked for fuel. The pump was working, but the fuel filter was clogged with decades of sediment. Replaced the filter. Checked for spark. The ignition coil was cracked, leaking voltage. Replaced the coil, cranked it again. The engine coughed, sputtered, and died. Most mechanics would have stopped there, called it a lost cause, told the customer to cut their losses. But Sarah heard something in that cough, something that told her the engine wasn't seized. It was confused. She dove deeper, pulled the valve covers, checked the timing chain, stretched but not broken, checked the compression, surprisingly good for a 30-year-old engine. The problem wasn't mechanical failure, it was neglect. The fuel injectors were gummed up with varnish from sitting too long. She pulled each one, soaked them in cleaner overnight, tested them with a bench rig she'd built herself. 3 of the 8 were completely clogged. She cleaned them, reassembled. Everything reconnected the battery, said a quiet prayer to whatever gods watch over stubborn mechanics and forgotten trucks, and turned the key. The engine cranked. Once, twice, 3 times. Then, against all logic, against all odds, it roared to life. Rough at first, coughing black smoke like it was clearing 30 years of anger from its lungs, but running, actually running. Sarah stood there in the garage, alone, listening to that engine idle, and she cried. Not because it was hard, though it was. Not because she'd doubted herself, though she had, but because she'd just saved something everyone else said was worthless. She'd given Mr. Henderson his truck back. She'd proven once again that broken things aren't garbage. They're just waiting for someone who believes they're worth saving. And now, 3 days later, word had gotten out. Somehow, small towns are efficient gossip machines. The story of Sarah fixing the unfixable truck had spread, and with it came the doubters, the men who couldn't stand the idea that a woman had done something they said couldn't be done, the ones who showed up at her garage, ready to prove she'd gotten lucky, ready to find the flaw, ready to laugh. Which brings us back to the parking lot. The three men, still laughing, still mocking, still filming. Sarah, still calm, still waiting. One of the men, the one in the cowboy's cap, looked over at her finally, as if noticing her for the first time. "You're the one who supposedly fixed this heap?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. Sarah nodded. He laughed again. "Lady, I don't know what kind of magic trick you pulled, but there's no way this truck's actually fixed. I'd bet my paycheck it won't run for more than 5 minutes before it dies again." His buddies echoed agreement, the phone camera still recording every word. Sarah stepped forward, her boots crunching on the gravel. She didn't raise her voice, didn't argue, just asked one simple question. "You want to see it run?" The man smirked. "Sure, let's see your miracle." Sarah walked to the truck, climbed into the driver's seat, the worn vinyl creaking under her weight, and turned the key. For a split second, there was silence. The men leaned in, grins spreading, ready to declare victory. And then the engine fired. Not a weak, struggling start, a confident, powerful roar. The exhaust note was clean, the idle smooth, the engine humming with the kind of health that only comes from someone who actually knows what they're doing. Sarah let it idle for a few seconds, then revved it once, smooth, responsive, no hesitation. She shut it off, climbed out, and looked at the three men. "Still think it's a miracle?" she asked quietly. The laughter died. The cowboy's cap guy's smirk faltered. The phone was still recording, capturing the moment his confidence turned into confusion. How'd you—" he stammered. "I listened," Sarah said simply. "The engine wasn't seized. The fuel system was clogged. The ignition was weak. The wiring needed cleaning. It wasn't magic, it was work." She paused, let the words sit. A lot of people see something that looks broken and assume it's trash. But if you actually take the time to understand it, to listen to what it's telling you, you can fix almost anything. She turned to walk back into the garage, then stopped and looked back. "And for the record, I'm not a lady. I'm a mechanic." The three men stood there, silent now, the phone still recording. The video would be uploaded. Later that night, it would go viral, not because of them, but because of her. 3 million views in 48 hours, comments flooding in from people who'd been underestimated, who'd been told they couldn't, who saw in Sarah Collins a reflection of their own fight. The dealership that told Mr. Henderson his truck was worthless issued a statement saying they stood by their assessment, but offered no further explanation. Mr. Henderson drove his truck every day, proud as hell, telling anyone. Who'd listen about the mechanic who refused to give up? And Sarah? She went back to work, because that's what she did. She fixed things. She proved doubters wrong. She gave people back the things they loved when everyone else said it was impossible, and she did it all in a small garage in rural Texas, under a sign that read, "Where Dead Engines Come to Life." Now, before we go any further, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching this from? Are you here in the States, or are you tuning in from somewhere else in the world? Drop a comment and let me know your city or country. I love seeing how far these stories reach. And while you're down there, tell me, have you ever been underestimated? Have you ever had someone laugh at you, tell you something was impossible, and then you went and proved them wrong? Because that's what this story is really about. It's not just about a truck. It's about refusing to accept the world's judgment of what's possible. So go ahead, drop that comment. Let's build a community of people who don't give up, who see potential where others see waste, who know that broken things aren't the end, they're just the beginning. Now, let's talk about what happened next, because fixing Mr. Henderson's truck was just the spark. What came after was the wildfire. Within a week, Sarah's phone was ringing non-stop, not just from locals, but from people across the state, across the country, people who'd seen the video and wanted to know if she could help them. Aki, woman in California, whose father's 1987 Chevy Silverado, the truck he'd taught her to drive in, had been declared totaled by every shop she took it to. A man in Florida whose vintage Bronco, inherited from his late brother, sat in his garage for 5 years because no one could figure out why it wouldn't start. A family in Montana whose ranch truck, essential for their livelihood, was quoted at $15,000 for repairs they couldn't afford. They all called Sarah, and Sarah, despite being booked solid for months, found ways to help. Sometimes it was a phone consultation, walking someone through diagnostics step by step. Sometimes it was shipping parts she'd refurbished herself. Sometimes it was just encouragement, telling people they could do it. They had the tools and the brains, they just needed to believe it was possible. She started a YouTube channel. Nothing fancy, just her phone propped on a toolbox, recording as she worked, explaining her process in plain language. No secrets, she said in her first video. No gatekeeping. If you want to learn, I'll teach you. The channel grew slowly at first, then exponentially. 100 subscribers became 1,000, became 10,000, became 100,000. Comments poured in from people thanking her, telling their own stories of being dismissed, sharing photos of engines they'd brought back to life using her methods. Sarah read every single comment she could, responded when she had time, because she remembered what it felt like to be alone, to be told she didn't belong, to wonder if she was crazy for trying. She wanted to make sure no one else felt that way. But success brings scrutiny, and not everyone was happy. The local dealership, the same one that told Mr. Henderson his truck was worthless, started losing business. Customers who used to take their vehicles there for service were going to Sarah instead, or worse, they were learning from her videos and doing the work themselves. The dealership owner, a man named Richard Harding, yes, the same Richard Harding who once laughed at a different mechanic's Beetle in another story, because some people never learn, decided to take action. He couldn't compete on skill or honesty, so he tried to compete on reputation. He started spreading rumors, told people Sarah cut corners, used cheap parts, didn't really know what she was doing, and just got lucky. He convinced the local newspaper to run a story questioning whether amateur mechanics were putting customers at risk. He even tried to file a complaint with the state licensing board, claiming Sarah was operating without proper credentials. She had every credential required, and then some, so the complaint went nowhere, but it cost her time and legal fees to fight it. Sarah could have fought back, could have gone public, exposed Harding's lies, turned it into a social media battle. But she didn't, because she'd learned something else from her father. The best response to doubt is proof. So instead of arguing, she worked. She took on the jobs no one else would touch, the engines declared unfixable, the vehicles written off as total losses. The projects other mechanics refused because they were too complicated, too time-consuming, too uncertain. Sarah took them all, and she fixed them. Every single one. And when customers asked why other shops had given up, she didn't badmouth the competition. She just said, sometimes it takes a different perspective. Sometimes you have to believe it's worth the effort. One case in particular became legendary. A local fire department had an old ladder truck, a 1988 model that had been in service for decades, that finally broke down. The department couldn't afford a new one, and the state grant they applied for wouldn't come through for at least 2 years. Without that truck, their response time for certain emergencies would double, putting lives at risk. They took it to the dealership. Harding quoted them $80,000 for a new engine and transmission, said it would take 6 months, and suggested they just lease a new truck instead, which, coincidentally, he could arrange for them at a great price. The fire chief, a pragmatic woman named Angela Rodriguez, who'd been with the department for 20 years, didn't have $80,000 or 6 months. She'd seen Sarah's video. She called. Sarah looked at the ladder truck, a beast of a vehicle, diesel engine with over 300,000 miles, transmission that ground like it was chewing rocks, hydraulic system for the ladder that leaked like a sieve, and did something nobody expected. She said yes, for free, because it was the fire department, because lives depended on it, because that's who Sarah was. She told Chief Rodriguez she'd need 2 weeks and access to the truck in her shop. The chief, stunned and grateful, agreed. For 14 days, Sarah worked 16-hour shifts. She pulled the transmission, found the clutch pack, destroyed, and the valve body clogged with metal shavings from worn gears. She disassembled the entire unit, replaced every damaged part, rebuilt the valve body by hand because replacement parts for a transmission that old didn't exist anymore. She overhauled the diesel engine, new injectors, new turbo seals, new fuel pump, complete timing service. She rebuilt the hydraulic system for the ladder, fabricating new seals and hoses because, again, original parts were discontinued. She did all of this while still running her regular shop, squeezing in the fire truck work between paying jobs, surviving on 4 hours of sleep and more coffee than any human should consume. On day 13, she test-started the engine. It fired immediately, ran smoother than it probably had in a decade. She tested the transmission, shifted perfectly through every gear. She tested the hydraulics. The ladder extended and retracted without a single leak. On day 14, she called Chief Rodriguez and told her to come, pick up her truck. When the chief arrived expecting to discuss payment plans or fundraising options, Sarah handed her the keys and a detailed report of everything that had been done. "How much do I owe you?" Rodriguez asked. Sarah shook her head. "Nothing. Just promise me you'll keep saving lives." Chief Rodriguez, a woman not prone to displays of emotion, teared up. They shook hands. The fire truck went back into service the next day, and the story, because of course someone filmed the handoff and posted it online, went even more viral than the Henderson truck video. 6 million views. National news picked it up. Sarah was invited to talk shows, podcasts, industry conferences. She declined most of them. She had work to do. Richard Harding, watching his business continue to decline, made one final play. He contacted a local TV station, claimed he had evidence that Sarah's repair work was dangerous, and demanded they investigate. The station, smelling a story, agreed. They showed up at Sarah's shop unannounced with cameras rolling, asked if she'd answer questions about allegations of unsafe repair practices. Sarah, standing in her shop covered in grease from elbows to fingertips, looked at the camera and said, "Sure, what do you want to know?" For the next 20 minutes on camera, she walked the reporter through her entire process, showed her certifications on the wall, ASE Master Technician, Emissions Inspection License, welding certifications, manufacturer training, courses she'd taken at her own expense, showed her equipment, diagnostic computers, torque wrenches calibrated annually, parts inventory organized and labeled, showed her records, every job documented, every part sourced and listed, every customer with a signed work order and warranty. The reporter, clearly expecting to find a sloppy operation, instead found the cleanest, most organized, most professionally run shop she'd ever seen. "What about the allegations?" the reporter asked. Sarah smiled, not cocky, just confident. "Who made the allegations?" Richard Harding, the reporter admitted. Sarah nodded. "Richard's upset because customers are choosing honesty over sales pitches. I don't sell people things they don't need. I don't exaggerate problems to inflate bills. And I don't give up on vehicles just because fixing them takes effort. If that's unsafe, then I guess I'm guilty." The segment aired 3 days later. It was supposed to be an exposé. Instead, it turned into a profile of excellence. The station got flooded with emails supporting Sarah. Harding's dealership got flooded with 1-star reviews. He eventually sold the business and moved out of state. Sarah kept working, kept teaching, kept proving that skill matters more than credentials, that persistence beats arrogance, that broken things are only worthless if you decide they are. She hired an assistant, a young woman named Jess, who'd been told by her high school guidance counselor that girls shouldn't go into trades, who applied to Sarah's shop with a handwritten letter explaining why she wanted to learn, who within 6 months could diagnose a failing alternator by sound alone. Sarah paid her well, taught her everything, encouraged her to ask questions, made mistakes in a safe place. Jess wasn't just an employee, she was a legacy. Sarah was doing for her what her father had done for Sarah, passing on the knowledge, the skills, the belief that you are capable of more than the world tells you. Years passed. The shop grew, but not in the way corporate success is measured. Sarah didn't franchise or scale or sell out to some big chain. She stayed small, stayed personal, stayed true to the principles her father taught her. She fixed cars. She taught people. She refused to give up on things others declared lost causes, and every single time someone walked into her shop with a vehicle they'd been told was unfixable, Sarah would listen to their story, look at the vehicle, and say the same thing. "Let me take a look. No promises, but I'll try." And more often than not, far more often than probability or logic or conventional wisdom said should be possible, she'd fix it. So what's the point of all this? Why does Sarah Collins's story matter? Because it's not really about trucks or engines or fixing broken things. It's about a bigger truth that most people forget. The world is full of people who will tell you something can't be done. People who will laugh at your efforts, doubt your abilities, dismiss your dreams as unrealistic or naive. And you have a choice in how you respond. You can argue with them, waste your energy trying to convince them they're wrong. Or you can do what Sarah did. You can prove it through your work, through your persistence, through the quiet, relentless refusal to accept that broken means worthless. Because the truth Sarah's father taught her, the truth she proved over and over again, is that most things that look dead aren't actually dead. They're just neglected, misunderstood, waiting for someone who cares enough to listen, to dig deeper, to believe they're worth the effort. And if you take nothing else from Sarah Collins's story, take this. You are capable of more than you've been told. The thing you've been told is impossible. Maybe it's not. Maybe it just needs someone willing to try. Maybe it needs you. So the next time someone tells you it can't be done, remember the woman in rural Texas who fixed the truck everyone said was finished. Remember that she didn't have special tools or secret knowledge or magic powers. She just had persistence, skill, and the refusal to accept someone else's verdict on what was possible. And if she could do it, so can you. Now, before we close, I want to hear from you again. What's the thing you've been told you can't do? What's the project, the dream, the goal that everyone says is impossible? Drop it in the comments, because I'll tell you what Sarah would tell you. It's not impossible. It's just hard. And hard is doable. So let's stop listening to the doubters and start proving them wrong. Together. One fixed engine, one rebuilt dream, one refusal to quit at a time. And if you're wondering what happened to Mr. Henderson and his truck, he drove it for 3 more years before passing away peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by family. His son inherited the truck. He still drives it today. And on the tailgate, he put a small sticker that reads, "Rebuilt by Sarah Collins," where dead engines come to life. Because some things are worth more than their resale value. Some things carry memories, history, love, and sometimes, if you're lucky, you find someone who understands that. Someone who sees past the rust and the dents and the decades of wear and sees what it really is. Not junk, but a story. Not garbage, but a legacy. Not the end, but a new beginning. That's the power of refusing to give up. That's the magic of believing something, or someone, is worth saving. And that's why Sarah Collins, a mechanic in rural Texas who was told she didn't belong, who was laughed at and doubted and dismissed, became a legend. Not because she was perfect, not because she never failed, but because every single time the world told her something was impossible, she rolled up her sleeves and got to work. And in the end, her work spoke louder than any words ever could. So go ahead, drop that comment. Tell me where you're from and what you're fighting for. Because this isn't just Sarah's story, it's yours too. And I can't wait to hear it.